accomplish. So that helps kind of bridge that gap or break the ice. It's like, hey, I can definitely kind of deliver the sound that you're looking for. It's just a matter of, us kind of knowing what you're going for specifically within your genre. So that's really helpful. I think that's one thing that's actually kind of been weird with my career is it's been until I kind of had some of the other accolades, it's been a little weird kind of making sure that artists know, because I can do a lot of different types of genres and I'm comfortable in a lot of different worlds, because there is such a large amount of specialization in the music industry, it seems like.
Yeah.
That was definitely a hurdle that I had overcome in my early career.
Wow, that's so interesting. Do you find as time goes on that you seem to specialize in one thing or another, even if it's not like a genre, maybe it's like a specific, thing within production or mixing or like a specific task?
Yeah, I these days I'm doing a lot less tracking than I used to, and definitely doing a lot more mixing and mastering, which is kind of interesting because I'm kind of coming full circle kind of into kind of what kind of got me started was doing a lot of mixing and mastering for, different people that I knew. So I kind of like it all. I'm not really willing yet to kind of hang up my tracking shoes, but I kind of love doing it all. But at this point, I'm definitely loving being able to do a lot more mixing and mastering. Yeah,
I totally hear that. I feel like it's inevitable to at some point niche down to like truly become great at one thing. I don't know. But it's not for the beginning of anyone's careers, I don't think. I think you really need experience with everything at the beginning. And I think also, like, even if you do mixing, I feel like production just can light such a fire and really, like, get you motivated to, like, do stuff. Because, like, I feel like with mixing and mastering, it could really kind of turn into a day job real quick, whereas the production thing really gets the creativity. Even though mixing is very creative and mastering is obviously very creative, I feel like doing a little bit of production at least can keep that like creative juices, coming. I don't know. That makes sense?
No, it totally does. And I actually totally agree. I think one of the things that's really interesting is I think a lot of the most interesting things that I've learned about mixing, I've learned from producers and not other engineers, which is kind of bizarre.
Could you give like an example?
So one thing that I feel like I consistently have always been getting better at, as far as mixing, is finding that right balance for the vocal, because it's so important, but the track can't feel big if the vocal's too loud. And so that's something that I've kind of, I guess maybe my taste has always been a little bit different than some of the artists or producers that I've worked with. So I kind of naturally default to more of like a 90s rock thing where the vocal isn't quite as loud, as prominent as it is in modern terms. So learning like, hey, no, it's okay. Like push that thing up. Like we need the spotlight on the person whose name's on the cover. That really is super important. So like different things where it's like, oh, cool. This is how I can get this like loud, but without making the track feel like it's karaoke. So and then just seeing like little different things, little tricks with, reverb and delay, just different things that producers will do sometimes where it's like, oh, that's kind of completely, I guess, the not technically correct way to do this or the most efficient way to do it. But you can't get that sound a different way. So it's cool that you did that the wrong way. Otherwise, I never would have thought to try that.
Ooh, can you be like specific about like, I don't know.
A good example is treating delay throws as complete, like separate entities is something that I see a lot of producers doing nowadays. So what they'll do is instead of just doing a delay throw from the vocal track, right? Mm-hmm. They'll just duplicate that track, completely process the vocal in a completely different way, whether EQ, compression, whatever, and then just send that directly insert with reverb and delay. So it's a complete sound unto its own, and it's not necessarily connected as a throw to the original dry vocal.
Right.
So, and because it's completely separate, you can really get radical with like the EQ and other things in a slightly different way that I just never would have probably tried, if I was like had in my mind that this is a throw from this sound instead of I'm going to make it its own sound.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like we become kind of also like slaves to our routing. I feel like like techie people, and I feel like sometimes the routing determines how you affect a vocal with like you know what I mean. So I feel like you can completely detach that like technical aspect from the way you do an effect like that. That's really interesting, and you could just do whatever you want, like you said. Like then you just go crazy.
Yeah, and then it's like, okay, now I can throw whatever modulation chorus all over the place, and I still have that nice, tight, pristine, dry vocal. And it's like just things that I probably would have done a little bit if I was, or to a lesser degree, if I was doing a throw to, another track. It's like a mental thing where I just approach it completely different, and I just can go radical if I want,
That's really cool. That's a great tip.
And I think it just helps like mentally just to think of it as it's its own thing and not to think of it as an attachment to the original signal or whatever.
Wow. I really love that. That's so cool. So tell me, like, I guess that we're already touching on mixing and stuff. So do you have an approach for mixing? Because what I heard sounds awesome.
I do. I've borrowed a lot of interesting, cool things from a lot of people. I don't know if I could call any of it my own, but I definitely have what I feel like is my own taste. I do quite a bit of multi-bus compression. It's very subtle, but I feel like that way I could maybe get a lot more overall compression without it sounding too glued and squeezed. It makes, using a little bit too much bus compression kind of takes, like it glues the mix in a nice way a lot of times, but you lose all the impact.
Right.
So, yeah. So I found that doing that, and this is obviously, or maybe, for those that aren't familiar, is kind of an homage to a lot of the things that Michael Brower does with his multi-bus kind of Browerizing scheme, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
And so this way I'm kind of getting, a couple, 2-3 dB on every bus out of 4 buses or whatever. And in the end, you're kind of in the neighborhood of about 6 dB worth of compression, but it doesn't sound like that. So it sounds a little more lively than that, which is cool.
Yeah, it's easy to get the mix a bit louder also when you're doing that.
Yeah, it just makes it a little bit easier to master because you're not kind of flattening away all the transients that you're going to, have the ability to, deal with it mastering in a kind of probably a cleaner way. So that way you can get the RMS up without losing all the transients.
Wow. And are you doing this in the box or out of the box?
I'm pretty much all in the box these days. I love mixing on desks. I just don't have time to recall things. So
right.
It's kind of, that's unfortunately at this point gone out the window for me. There's nothing like pushing up faders though. I'll say that. It's one of the most fun things I think you could probably ever do. It's a lot of fun to push faders up and down and do a mix on a desk.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel like I approach things differently when I do that. I treat it more like an instrument.
Yeah. I haven't been privileged to work on a desk yet. So and I feel like at this point it's almost irrelevant because it's like everyone seems to be moving into the box. Like, even Michael Brower is in the box now because he's, because of the recall, like you said it.
Exactly.
So
it's just, there's no time for it.
I think I missed my opportunity. I got in the game like a couple years too late or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Just by the luck of timing, I kind of happened to hop in the music industry after Pro Tools was already kind of had taken over the role of the tape machine, but not so long after that I wasn't able to kind of learn on tape machines. So like when I went to school, that's what I learned, both tape and DAWs. Yeah. And so I definitely feel like that's unfortunately a skill that would help a lot of engineers, but it's not in a lot of the situations where they can learn that stuff these days.
Yeah, well, I guess what would be like a lesson from the desk that you'd want to impart on like somebody getting started who probably will never touch a desk in his life or her life?
I would say the thing that to me I've noticed that I miss most about not working on a desk is sometimes you might be, 10 or 15% through a mix, just getting a vibe, and you're like, no, this isn't it. And on a desk, you can just slap the faders down, and then by the time you get to the first course, you got a whole different mix-up. That's a lot more difficult to do in the box. It's just, as far as just, having the ability to touch 8 or 10 things at a time. So it's a little more time-consuming, and sometimes you might be like, oh, let me just keep going down this road because it's not so easy to just slap down the faders and start over real quick. So some of that is just, like I said, it's just a tactile thing that gives you, puts you in a mindset where you're like, that's fine. Let me just start this over real quick and then go in a different direction. So I feel like that's one of the things that, there are a lot of control surfaces out there. So some of that can be alleviated depending on what you're using. But that's one of the advantages of working on a desk is just having some of that tactile response. Like as far as sound quality and all that, there's tons of ways to get great sound in the box without any issues. So that's less of an issue for me.
I feel like, just like when you play a new instrument and that inspires you to like play more, like if you get a new guitar, you're going to want to play more guitar. Like I feel like just having that tactile thing with the desk just makes it so much more fun. I mean, I don't have any experience, but I'm vibing off of what you're saying. It's just like, it inspires you to probably work more and do better work. And I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I said, when everything's just kind of spread out in front of you, everything's just less of a chore and more of playing an instrument. So
yeah,
it's like,
cool.
Let me spin, let me go back and just ride that vocal part again real quick. Wait, no, because everything happens in real time. So all it takes is one playthrough to get it right, and you're good. So, I feel like like I said, just approach it more as an instrument instead of like okay, let me try this. Now let's take a listen. Okay, no, let me try that. Now let's take a listen. So it's kind of the two things are more kind of in one pass instead of, okay, let me do this thing that I'm trying to hear. Now let me listen and evaluate it.
Right. Yeah. That's totally the vibe with like automation in the DAW. It's like, okay, I think it needs to go up this much. Let's go play it back and hear it, as opposed to just feeling it out. I was watching a video, speaking of Michael Brower, recently. I think it was a mix with the Masters, or it was like Sonic Scoop. I'm not totally sure, but he like was mixing something. I was just like watch him like ride the fader. It looked like he was like playing a video game or something. He was like having a blast, just like riding like a few faders. And it's just like, I've never like wrote a fader like that. That looks amazing.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's definitely one of the things that it's just inspiring. It's just fun to do. And I think that's, like you said, especially when you're not as involved in the production of a track or a project, mixing and mastering can become like a 9 to 5 kind of thing if you let it. So things like that definitely help keep you inspired and just, well, I'm playing a different song today because it's all on this different desk. But like I said, there's so many wonderful advantages to working in the box that, there's just no going back.
Is there any specific, like, I guess, plugins or tools that you use to kind of help get that sound that maybe you would be missing from having a console?
There's so many good tools nowadays. It's pretty incredible thinking about it. I'm a gigantic fan of pretty much all the Leapwing audio stuff. The Dyne 1.3 is incredible. It's definitely a way for me anyway, I like to do a lot of parallel processing. So it's definitely a way to really do a lot of manipulation of the vibe of something without totally kind of reskinning the surface of it. Being able to work in a parallel process that way. It's like basically it's a multi-band parallel processor. So
right. It's like the L3 or something from Waves, I think.
Kind of, sort of, yeah. And it just, it gives you a lot of ability to, I don't know, get some of that energy that I'm used to hearing from analog devices, where it's not necessarily a distortion, but it's just like a certain way that an op amp or a transformer responds to a transient that I guess technically is, THD or whatever, total harmonic distortion, but it adds so much more to that. It feels like a parallel process where you don't lose necessarily the front edge of the transient, but you get this extra energy frequency-wise.
Very cool. What are some of those, I guess, compressors that you're using for the parallel compression that you're doing? Is that one? I'm assuming that's one of them.
That's generally on my final master bus as kind of a part of my get more energy, more RMS energy without losing the transients kind of approach. So, but as far as like my kind of the 4 buses is basically what I'm using these days. I have like an A through A through D bus, right, that have parallel processing on them, or not parallel, but compression on them. And then I have an E bus, which is, I guess, technically a 5th bus. That's totally clean. That's usually what I put, anything that just doesn't need any squeeze on it. And generally I'm using a distressor for my A bus, which could really be anything. I just kind of gave them letters because I don't want to predetermine